Before we dive into this incredible story of family, pride, and unexpected revelations, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This journey will show you that sometimes the people we underestimate the most can surprise us in the most extraordinary ways. Enjoy the story. My name is Robert Sterling, but everyone calls me Bob. I'm 67 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened just 6 months ago. It's a story that changed not only my relationship with my son, but also taught me that sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't revenge. It's showing people who you really are. It started at what should have been a celebration. My grandson, Tommy, had just graduated from college with honors, and we were having a family dinner at my son Marcus's house. Marcus is 35. Works as a senior consultant at Sterling & Associates, drives a BMW, and lives in one of those fancy neighborhoods, where the houses all look like magazine covers. I was proud of him, or at least I thought I was. Marcus had achieved everything I'd dreamed of for him: education, success, financial security. But somewhere along the way, success had changed him into someone I barely recognized. The dinner was going well until I made what Marcus clearly considered a mistake. I'd brought a gift for Tommy, a watch that had belonged to my father, Marcus's grandfather. It wasn't expensive, just a simple Timex, but it had sentimental value. My father had worn it to work every day for 30 years. When I handed Tommy the gift box, he smiled genuinely and thanked me. But Marcus looked at it like I'd handed his son garbage. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice carrying that condescending tone he'd developed over the years, "you really shouldn't have bothered." "I wanted to give Tommy something meaningful," I replied. "This watch belonged to your grandfather. He wore it proudly every day. It's a $20 watch from 1985, Dad." The comment cut through the dinner conversation like a knife. My daughter-in-law Sarah shifted uncomfortably, and Tommy looked down at his hands, clearly embarrassed for me. "Marcus," I said quietly, "it's not about the money. It's about family history, about connection." That's when my son said the words that would change everything between us forever. "You know what, Dad? I'm tired of this. I'm tired of pretending and making excuses for you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about, son?" "I'm talking about the fact that you're 67 years old and you've never accomplished anything in your life. You worked at the post office for 30 years, then spent another 10 years at Murphy's hardware store. You drive a car that's older than some of my employees. You live in a tiny apartment that probably costs less than my monthly car payment, and you shop at thrift stores." Sarah tried to interrupt. "Marcus, that's not—" "No, Sarah, let me finish. Dad, do you have any idea how embarrassing it is when my colleagues ask about my family? When they want to know what my father does for a living, and I have to explain that he's basically a 67-year-old man with no ambition, no achievements, and no prospects." I sat there, stunned. This was my son, the boy I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college, the young man I'd supported through graduate school, the person I'd loved unconditionally for 35 years. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I worked hard to provide for our family. I may not have gotten rich, but I was always there for you. Being there isn't enough, Dad. Being nice isn't enough. You've spent your entire life being content with mediocrity, and frankly, you're dead weight." Those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. Dead weight. You're a burden, Dad, to me, to this family, to everyone around you. You take up space, but you don't contribute anything meaningful. You're exactly the kind of person who proves that not everyone can be successful, that some people are just meant to be ... ordinary. The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of my heart breaking. Tommy had tears in his eyes, staring at his plate. Sarah looked horrified, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly, not from age or weakness, but from a rage I hadn't felt in decades. "I see," I said calmly. "Dead weight. Dad, where are you going?" Tommy asked, his young voice full of concern. I looked at my grandson, this wonderful young man who was just beginning his life, and I made a promise to myself that he would never speak to his father the way Marcus had just spoken to me. "I'm going home, Tommy. Thank you for a lovely evening." As I walked toward the door, I heard Sarah's voice behind me, sharp with anger. "Marcus, how could you say those things to your father?" But I didn't stop to listen to the argument that followed. I got in my 15-year-old Honda Civic, the car Marcus was so ashamed of, and drove back to my modest apartment, with his words echoing in my mind, "Dead weight. A burden, someone who never accomplished anything." As I sat in my living room that night, surrounded by the simple furniture and humble belongings that apparently embarrassed my son so much, I made a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew me. You see, Marcus didn't know the truth about his old man. He didn't know about the investment portfolio I'd been building for 40 years. He didn't know about the real estate holdings, the stock options, the carefully managed assets that had grown from a few $100s into something much, much larger. He didn't know because I'd never told him. I'd lived modestly, worked honest jobs, and let everyone, including my own son, assume that what they saw was all there was to Robert Sterling. But if Marcus thought his father was dead weight, then it was time to show him exactly what this dead weight was capable of accomplishing. Next morning, I was going to make some phone calls that would change everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my small living room, staring at a framed photo of Marcus when he was 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning after losing his first tooth. Back then, I was his hero. Back then, he thought I could do anything. Where had I gone wrong? When had my son become the kind of person who measured a man's worth by his bank account and the price of his car? I kept replaying his words, "Dead weight. A burden. You've never accomplished anything." The irony was almost laughable. If Marcus only knew what I'd accomplished while he was growing up, what I'd built while working those embarrassing jobs he was so ashamed of. You see, when Marcus was born, I made a decision. I decided that I would provide for my family, not just through my salary, but by being smart with every dollar I earned. While other people my age were buying new cars and bigger houses, I was buying stocks. While they were taking expensive vacations, I was investing in real estate. While they were living paycheck to paycheck, I was building something that would ensure my family's security forever. But I never told anyone. Not my late wife Helen, not Marcus, not anyone. I lived modestly, worked my regular jobs, and let my investments grow quietly in the background. It started with $50 a month in a mutual fund, then $100, then I bought my first rental property, then another dot by the time Marcus graduated high school. I had enough money to pay for his college education without taking a single loan. But I didn't tell him that. I let him think I was struggling to afford it, working overtime at the post office to pay his tuition. I wanted him to appreciate the value of education, to understand that someone was sacrificing for his future. When he started graduate school, I could have easily paid for that too. Instead, I quietly paid off his student loans after he graduated, making it look like a clerical error or loan forgiveness program. I wanted him to feel the weight of responsibility, the motivation that comes from having to work for something. Now, at 67, I had more money than Marcus would earn in 10 years at his fancy consulting job. But he didn't know that, because I'd never flaunted it. I'd never used money to buy respect or love. I'd lived according to the values my own father taught me. Work hard, live modestly, and let your actions speak louder than your bank account. But apparently, those values meant nothing to my son. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan had been managing my portfolio for 20 years, and he was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my wealth. "Bob, good to hear from you. How are you doing? I need to ask you about something, Jonathan. That consulting firm you mentioned a few months ago, the one that was looking for investors, Sterling and Associates. Are they still in play?" There was a pause. "Yes, actually. They're in worse shape than we initially thought. The owners are actively looking to sell." "Why, I thought you weren't interested in getting involved in that sector." I smiled for the first time since that disastrous dinner. "Let's just say my circumstances have changed. I want you to arrange a meeting with their financial team. I want to know everything about their books, their client list, their employees, everything. Bob, Sterling and Associates is a 7-figure acquisition. Are you sure you want to, Jonathan? Just set up the meeting. And do it discreetly. I don't want anyone to know I'm the potential buyer." After I hung up, I sat back in my threadbare recliner, the one Marcus had suggested. I replaced with something that doesn't look like it came from a garage sale, and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Sterling and Associates, the prestigious consulting firm where my son worked, where he impressed clients and colleagues with his intelligence and ambition. The same company he was so proud to be associated with, the job that made him feel superior to his failure of a father. I spent the rest of the morning researching everything I could find about the company. Financial reports, client testimonials, employee reviews, news articles. What I discovered was fascinating. Sterling and Associates was indeed struggling. They'd lost several major clients over the past year, and their operating costs were outpacing their revenue. The partners were looking to sell quickly, and they weren't being particularly choosy about buyers. More interesting was what I learned about Marcus's position at the company. He was a senior consultant, well regarded by his peers, with a client list that included some impressive names. He made good money, excellent money by most standards, but he wasn't indispensable. In a company reorganization, a position like his could easily be eliminated. That afternoon, Jonathan called back. "I've set up a meeting for tomorrow at 10 a.m. They're very interested in talking to a serious buyer. I've told them you're a private investor who prefers to operate through shell companies for privacy reasons." Perfect. What do they know about me? Nothing. As far as they're concerned, you're Mr. Johnson, a successful businessman who's looking to diversify his portfolio with a service-based acquisition. I hung up and looked around my small apartment. Tomorrow, I would walk into my son's workplace, not as the embarrassing father he was ashamed of, but as a potential owner of the company. The thought filled me with a mixture of excitement and sadness. I wasn't doing this for revenge, exactly. I was doing it to prove a point, to show Marcus that success comes in many forms, and that judging people by their appearances is a dangerous game. But mostly, I was doing it because I was tired of hiding who I really was, tired of pretending to be less than I was to make other people comfortable, tired of being called deadweight by the sun. I'd spent 35 years supporting and loving. It was time for Robert Sterling to show the world, and especially his son, who he really was. The morning of my meeting at Sterling and Associates, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on a suit. Not the cheap polyester one I wore to church, but a real suit. Italian wool, custom tailored, purchased 3 years ago for an investment conference that I'd ended up attending virtually. Looking at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. This wasn't the humble postal worker or the friendly hardware store clerk. This was Robert Sterling, the investor, the businessman, the man my son had never bothered to discover. The Sterling and Associates building was in the financial district, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. As I walked through the marble lobby, I thought about how many times Marcus had described this place to me, always with pride in his voice. He loved working here, loved being associated with success and prestige. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me time to think about what I was really doing. Was this just an elaborate way to hurt my son the way he'd hurt me? Or was I genuinely trying to teach him something important about respect and humility? Maybe it was both. The conference room was exactly what I'd expected. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 3 people were waiting for me. James Sterling, no relation, despite the name, the managing partner. Patricia Wells, the chief financial officer, and David Chen, the operations director. Mr. Johnson, James Sterling said, standing to shake my hand, "Thank you for your interest in our company. Jonathan Pierce speaks very highly of you." "Thank you for seeing me on short notice," I replied, settling into my chair. "I've reviewed your preliminary financials, and I'm intrigued by the potential here." For the next 2 hours, they walked me through everything: client portfolios, revenue streams, operating expenses, employee costs, growth projections. It was exactly as I'd suspected. The company was profitable but struggling, with too much overhead and too much dependence on a few major clients. "What about your staff?" I asked. "How many employees would be retained in an acquisition?" Patricia Wells consulted her notes. "We have 23 full-time consultants, 8 support staff, and 4 partners. Any new owner would want to evaluate each position for efficiency." "I'd like to see the employee roster," I said casually. "Backgrounds, performance reviews, client relationships." "Of course," David Chen said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "These are our senior consultants. They're the backbone of our client services." I opened the folder, and there it was: Marcus Sterling's personnel file, his photo, his resume, his performance evaluations, his salary information, everything my son probably thought a man like his father could never access. "This Marcus Sterling," I said, pointing to his file, "senior consultant, impressive client list. How is his performance?" "Marcus is solid," James Sterling replied. "Good with clients, meets his targets, professional demeanor. He's not our top performer, but he's reliable." "Any issues?" Patricia Wells hesitated. "Nothing major. He can be physical with support staff sometimes, a bit condescending. But his client work is excellent." I nodded, filing that information away. So even at work, Marcus had developed a reputation for looking down on people he considered beneath him. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for a decision?" I asked. "We'd like to close within 60 days, James Sterling said. "We have other interested parties, but Jonathan indicated you're prepared to move quickly." "I am. I'll need to conduct my own due diligence, of course, but assuming everything checks out, I'm prepared to make an offer within 2 weeks." After the meeting, I sat in my car in the parking garage, looking at the employee roster I'd somehow managed to walk out with. Marcus Sterling, senior consultant, hired 5 years ago at a starting salary that was more than I'd ever made in a single year at any of my embarrassing jobs. But what struck me most was his employee emergency contact information. Under relationship, next to my name and phone number, he'd written "Father, retired." Not even father, just father retired. As if my current status was more important than our relationship. That evening, I called Jonathan Pierce. "How did it go?" he asked. "I want to buy it," I said, without preamble. "All of it. What do I need to do?" "Bob, are you sure about this? It's a significant investment, and running a consulting firm is very different from managing a portfolio. I'm not planning to run it personally, Jonathan. I'm planning to own it. There's a difference. What's your offer?" I'd done the math during the drive home. The company was worth roughly $2.8 million based on their books, but they were motivated sellers. In a difficult market, $2.2 million, cash, 60-day close. Jonathan whistled. "That's aggressive. And you have that much liquid?" "I have that much and more. Jonathan, you know that. Right, I'll draw up the preliminary offer tonight and present it tomorrow." After I hung up, I sat in my small kitchen, eating a simple dinner of soup and crackers, the kind of meal Marcus would probably consider further evidence of my failures. But, for the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't felt since that horrible dinner at his house. I felt powerful, not in a vengeful way, but in a way that reminded me who I really was, under the modest exterior I'd maintained for so many years. Tomorrow, I would officially offer to buy my son's company. In 2 weeks, if all went well, I would own the place where Marcus Sterling worked, the place that gave him the status and prestige he valued so much. And then, we would see who was dead weight. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of legal documents, financial reviews, and meetings with accountants and lawyers. I felt like I was living a double life. Mornings spent in conference rooms negotiating the acquisition of Sterling and Associates. Afternoons at the hardware store where I still worked part-time. Evenings in my modest apartment reviewing contracts. Marcus called me twice during this period, which was unusual. Normally, he only called on holidays or when he needed something. "Dad, how are you doing?" he asked during the first call, his voice carrying what I thought might be guilt. "I'm fine, son. Just keeping busy. Listen, about the other night at dinner. Maybe I was a little harsh. A little harsh." That's how he described telling his father he was dead weight and a burden. "It's fine, Marcus. You said what you felt. Dad, I just ... I want you to understand that I'm under a lot of pressure at work. We're going through some changes, and I guess I took it out on you." "What kind of changes?" "Oh, nothing major. Just some restructuring talks. You know how corporate life is." I did know. Actually, I knew that his company was about to be sold to a mysterious investor who had offered $2.2 million cash for a 60-day close. I knew because I was that investor. "I'm sure everything will work out fine," I told him. "Yeah, I hope so. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon." The second call came 3 days later. "Dad, I wanted to let you know that we might have some big news at work soon. The partners are talking about bringing in new investors, maybe expanding the company." "That sounds exciting." "It is. If this goes through, it could mean promotion opportunities, maybe even partnership track for senior consultants like me." I listened to my son's excitement about prospects that I was directly creating, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in his ambition, sadness that he still didn't understand what really mattered in life, and anticipation for the moment when he would learn who was really behind his exciting opportunities. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? The choices you made, I mean. Working simple jobs, never really trying to build something bigger." The question hit me harder than I'd expected. "Marcus, do you think success is only measured by job titles and salary figures?" "Well, no, but, come on Dad, wouldn't you have wanted more?" Wouldn't you have wanted to be able to afford nice things, to travel, to have people respect you for your achievements? People should respect you for who you are, not what you've accumulated. That's a nice philosophy, Dad, but it's not how the real world works. After that conversation, I found myself questioning my plan. Was I about to traumatize my son just to prove a point? Was I being petty and vindictive? But then I remembered his words. Dead weight. A burden. You take up space, but don't contribute anything meaningful. No, this wasn't about revenge. This was about teaching a lesson that apparently couldn't be taught any other way. On Friday afternoon, Jonathan Pierce called with the news I'd been waiting for. Congratulations, Bob. They accepted your offer. Sterling and Associates is yours as of Monday morning. What about the employees? Are they being informed? The new ownership will be announced Monday at a company-wide meeting. The employees will be told that the company has been acquired by Sterling Holdings LLC, the shell company we set up for the purchase. And they don't know who's behind Sterling Holdings. As far as they know, it's an anonymous private investor who prefers to remain hands-off, which is technically true. I spent the weekend in a strange state of nervous excitement. On Monday morning, my son would go to work at a company I owned. He would sit in meetings about his future that I would ultimately control. He would wonder about the mysterious new owner who had saved his job and possibly created new opportunities for advancement. And he would have no idea that the mysterious investor was his dead-weight father. Sunday evening. Marcus called again. Dad, tomorrow is the big day. We're meeting the new ownership team. That must be exciting. It is. I've been thinking, if this goes well, if I get promoted like I'm hoping, maybe I could help you out a little. You know, with your rent, maybe, get you a newer car. The offer stung, but not in the way he intended. He was trying to be generous, trying to make up for his harsh words by offering to treat me like a charity case. That's very thoughtful, Marcus, but I'm doing fine. Dad, there's no shame in accepting help, especially from family. You're right, I said. There's no shame in accepting help from family. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my son was about to learn some very important lessons about family, about assumptions, and about the danger of judging people by their appearances. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., too excited to sleep. Today was the day I would officially become the owner of Sterling and Associates. And more importantly, the day I would begin the process of teaching my son the lesson he desperately needed to learn. I had a choice to make about how to handle the revelation. I could walk into the office Monday morning and announce myself as the new owner, shocking Marcus in front of all his colleagues. It would be dramatic, certainly. And it would definitely prove my point about not judging people by their appearances. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that public humiliation wasn't what I wanted. That would make me no better than Marcus, using my power to embarrass someone I was supposed to love. Instead, I decided on a different approach. I would observe first, learn about how Marcus behaved in his professional environment, and then reveal myself privately. The lesson would be more powerful if it came from understanding rather than shock. Jonathan had arranged for me to have access to the building and to observe the company meeting through a closed-circuit feed from a conference room down the hall. I could watch my son's reaction to the ownership change without him knowing I was there. At 9 a.m., I was sitting in conference room B, watching a live feed of conference room A, where all 23 consultants and support staff were gathered to meet their new ownership. Marcus was sitting in the front row, looking confident and eager. He'd clearly dressed for the occasion, his best suit, perfect tie, the kind of polished appearance he'd worked hard to cultivate over the years. James Sterling, the managing partner, stood at the front of the room with a woman I didn't recognize, apparently a representative from Sterling Holdings LLC, the shell company I'd created for the purchase. "Good morning, everyone," James began. "As you all know, Sterling and Associates has been acquired by Sterling Holdings, a private investment firm. I'm pleased to introduce Sarah Mitchell, who will be representing the new ownership during the transition period." Sarah Mitchell was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s whom Jonathan had hired to serve as my public face during the initial transition. She knew my real identity, of course, but to everyone else, she was simply the representative of an anonymous investor. "Thank you, James," Sarah said, addressing the room. "I want to assure all of you that this acquisition is not about cutting costs or eliminating positions. Our investor believes strongly in the potential of Sterling and Associates and wants to see the company grow and thrive." I watched Marcus's face light up. This was exactly what he'd hoped to hear. "However," Sarah continued, "the new ownership will be implementing some changes in company culture and management practices. We believe that success comes not just from financial performance, but from how team members treat each other and how the company serves its community." "What kind of changes?" asked one of the consultants. "We'll be implementing new evaluation criteria that include collaboration, mentorship, and respect for all team members. We'll also be establishing a community service component, where consultants will be expected to volunteer in local organizations." I saw Marcus shift uncomfortably in his seat. Community service wasn't exactly his strong suit. "Are there going to be layoffs?" asked someone from the back. "No immediate layoffs are planned," Sarah replied. "However, all positions will be evaluated over the next 90 days. The new ownership is particularly interested in promoting individuals who demonstrate leadership, humility, and genuine respect for their colleagues." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Sarah answering questions about benefits, policies, and the transition timeline. I watched Marcus throughout, noting how his initial excitement seemed to dim as Sarah talked about values like humility and community service. After the meeting ended, I switched to observing the general office area. I wanted to see how Marcus interacted with his colleagues when he thought no important people were watching. What I saw made my heart sink. Marcus was talking to Janet, one of the support staff, about some client files. Even through the security camera feed, I could see his dismissive body language, the way he spoke down to her, the impatience in his gestures when she asked for clarification. Then I watched him interact with Tom, a junior consultant who'd apparently made some kind of error on a client report. Marcus's response was condescending and harsh, criticizing Tom in front of other colleagues instead of addressing the issue privately. This wasn't the son I'd raised. This wasn't the boy who used to help me carry groceries for elderly neighbors, who'd once spent his entire allowance buying Christmas presents for kids at the local children's home. Success had changed Marcus, and not for the better. He'd become the kind of person who measured his worth by his ability to look down on others. That afternoon, I called Sarah Mitchell. "How did the meeting go from your perspective?" I asked. "Exactly as you'd expect. Most of the staff seem excited about the acquisition and the growth opportunities. But I have to ask, are you sure about this approach? If your goal is to reconnect with your son, this seems like a very complicated way to do it." "My goal isn't just to reconnect with him, Sarah. My goal is to help him become the kind of person I can be proud to call my son. And you think owning his company is the way to do that? I think showing him that success without character is meaningless is the way to do that." I want him to understand that the deadweight father he's so ashamed of has actually been more successful than he could imagine. But that success means nothing if you use it to hurt people. That evening, Marcus called me, just as I'd expected. Dad, the most amazing thing happened today. Our company got bought by this investment firm, and they're talking about expansion, promotions, all kinds of opportunities. That sounds wonderful, son. It is. The only weird thing is that they're really focused on company culture and community values. They want us to do volunteer work and demonstrate leadership and humility. It's a little touchy-feely for a business environment, you know. Maybe they think those qualities are important for long-term success. Maybe. Anyway, I wanted to call and share the good news. If this leads to a promotion like I think it will, I'll definitely be able to help you out more. Maybe get you moved into a better apartment, something in a nicer neighborhood. That's very thoughtful, Marcus. Dad, I've been thinking about what I said the other night. I know I was harsh, but I want you to know that I do love you. I just ... I wish you'd had more ambition, you know. I wish you'd wanted more for yourself. What if I told you that I have more than you think? What do you mean? Nothing, son. Just ... Maybe you shouldn't be so quick to judge what people have accomplished based on what you can see. After I hung up, I realized that the most difficult part of this whole plan wasn't going to be revealing who I was. It was going to be helping Marcus understand why I'd hidden my success for so long. And why real accomplishment isn't about impressing people. It's about building something meaningful while staying true to your values. Tomorrow, I would start the process of teaching my son those lessons, one day at a time. The next few weeks were fascinating and heartbreaking in equal measure. Through Sarah Mitchell and the access I had as the building owner, I was able to observe Marcus in his natural work environment without him knowing I was watching. What I saw both impressed and disgusted me. Marcus was undeniably talented at his job. His client presentations were polished, his analytical skills were sharp, and his work product was consistently high quality. But the way he treated people he considered beneath him was appalling, and it reminded me painfully of that dinner where he'd called me dead weight. I watched him dismiss Janet's suggestions during team meetings, interrupt Tom when he was presenting ideas, and generally conduct himself like someone who believed his success gave him the right to treat others poorly. But the incident that really opened my eyes happened during the third week of my ownership. Marcus was assigned to work with Lisa Chen, a bright young woman who'd just graduated from Northwestern with honors. She was eager, hardworking, and full of fresh ideas. She reminded me of myself when I was young, hungry to prove herself, but lacking the experience to always know the best approach. I was monitoring the office through the security system when I saw Marcus and Lisa working on a presentation for a major client. Lisa was suggesting some innovative approaches to the client's marketing challenges. Ideas that actually seemed quite clever to me. But Marcus shut her down immediately, and not privately. Lisa, this is exactly the kind of naive thinking that makes clients question our credibility, he said loudly enough for the entire office to hear. Maybe you should focus on basic research until you understand how real business works. I watched this brilliant young woman's face crumble. She looked around the office, clearly embarrassed, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. Instead of nurturing a promising new talent, my son had humiliated her in front of her peers. That's when I knew this wasn't just about teaching Marcus a lesson about judging people. This was about teaching him basic human decency. That afternoon, I called Sarah Mitchell. I need you to schedule a one-on-one meeting with Marcus tomorrow, I told her. Tell him the new ownership wants to discuss his leadership potential. Are you ready to reveal yourself? Not yet. But it's time to start planting some seeds. The next day, I positioned myself in the adjacent conference room where I could hear everything through the shared wall. Marcus, thank you for taking the time to meet with me, Sarah began. I've been observing team dynamics since the acquisition, and I wanted to get your perspective on leadership and company culture. Absolutely, Marcus replied, and I could hear the eagerness in his voice. I'm very interested in taking on more leadership responsibilities. Tell me about your management philosophy. How do you motivate people to perform at their best? I believe in maintaining high standards and being direct about performance expectations. Sometimes you have to push people out of their comfort zones to help them grow. Can you give me a specific example? Well, just yesterday I was working with one of our newer consultants, Lisa Chen. She had some ideas that were frankly unrealistic for our client base. I made sure she understood that we can't afford to present amateur-level thinking to our clients. And how did you communicate that feedback? I was straightforward about it. Look, sometimes you have to be blunt to get through to people. Coddling, then, doesn't help anyone. I felt sick listening to him. Marcus genuinely believed that humiliating someone in public was effective leadership. Marcus, let me ask you something about success, Sarah continued. What do you think makes someone truly successful in business? Results, obviously. Performance metrics, client retention, revenue generation. Everything else is just feel-good nonsense that doesn't impact the bottom line. What about character? What about how you treat people on your way to achieving those results? Well, sure, you want to be professional. But at the end of the day, this is a competitive business. If people can't handle direct feedback, maybe they're in the wrong field, I see. Marcus, can I ask you something personal? Tell me about your family background. How did your upbringing shape your views on success? There was a pause, and I held my breath. My mother passed away a few years ago, but she was incredible. Very supportive of my goals. My father is, well, he's a good man, but he's never really understood ambition. He's worked blue-collar jobs his whole life, never tried to build anything significant. Do you think that makes him unsuccessful? Not unsuccessful, exactly. Just ... limited. He's always been content with a small life, and I've always wanted more than that. I think it's important to have bigger aspirations. What if I told you that some of the most successful people I know live very modestly? What if I told you that judging someone's worth by their external circumstances can be a costly mistake? I suppose that's theoretically possible, but in my experience, successful people usually want to show their success. They drive nice cars, live in good neighborhoods, dress well. It's human nature to want recognition for your achievements. Is it, or is it possible that truly confident people don't need external validation? After the meeting ended, I sat in that conference room for a long time, processing what I'd heard. My son had no concept of quiet confidence, of building something meaningful without needing to advertise it. He'd bought into the idea that success was about impressing other people rather than accomplishing something worthwhile. That evening, Marcus called me, practically bubbling with excitement. Dad, you won't believe the day I had. I had a one-on-one meeting with someone from the new ownership group. That sounds important. It was incredible. They're asking about leadership, philosophy, management style, all the things you'd discuss if you were considering someone for a major promotion. What kinds of questions did they ask? Lots of stuff about business strategy and team management. Oh, and they asked about my family background. My heart started beating faster. What did you tell them about your family? I told them the truth, that Mom was amazing and supportive, and that you're a good man who just never had much ambition. I explained that I've always been driven to achieve more than the simple life you chose. I see, Dad, I hope you don't take that the wrong way. I love you, and I'm not ashamed of you. I just think it's important to be honest about our different approaches to life. Of course, son, honesty is always important. The thing is, I think this conversation went really well. I think they see me as someone with leadership potential. Someone who understands what it takes to succeed in a competitive environment. After I hung up, I realized that my son had no idea how much trouble he was in. He thought his callous treatment of colleagues and his dismissive attitude toward people he considered beneath him were strengths. He thought his willingness to humiliate a young woman in front of her peers demonstrated leadership. It was time to start showing him how wrong he was. Over the following weeks, I implemented what I privately called the education of Marcus Sterling. Through Sarah Mitchell, I began introducing policies and initiatives designed to challenge my son's worldview and force him to confront his own behavior. The first change was the implementation of 360-degree performance reviews, where employees would be evaluated not just by their superiors, but by their peers and subordinates as well. This is ridiculous, I heard Marcus complaining to his colleague Brad during one of my security monitoring sessions. How are we supposed to maintain authority if the support staff gets to critique our management style? I don't know, man, Brad replied, but the new owners seem pretty serious about this culture change stuff. The second change was the introduction of mandatory mentorship programs, where senior consultants would be paired with junior staff members and evaluated on their development and job satisfaction. Marcus was assigned to mentor Lisa Chen, the same young woman he'd humiliated in front of the office. I'd watched their first mentoring session through the conference room camera, and it was painful to witness. Marcus clearly saw the assignment as a burden, speaking to Lisa in the same condescending tone he'd used with me at that dinner. Lisa, I want you to understand that this mentorship program is really about helping you develop realistic expectations, he said. The ideas you've been presenting show creativity, but they lack the practical understanding that comes with experience. I appreciate the feedback, Lisa replied politely. Could you help me understand what specific aspects need improvement? Well, for starters, you need to remember that clients aren't looking for revolutionary ideas. They're looking for proven strategies that minimize risk and maximize results. I wanted to intervene, to tell him he was crushing the spirit of a talented young professional. But I knew the lesson would be more powerful if it came from consequences, rather than direct confrontation. The third change was the most significant, a new compensation structure that included community service requirements and peer collaboration scores alongside traditional performance metrics. They want us to volunteer, Marcus asked Sarah during their next meeting. How is volunteer work relevant to consulting performance? The new ownership believes that employees who contribute to their communities and demonstrate genuine care for others make better business partners. Sarah explained, studies show that companies with strong community engagement have higher client loyalty and better long-term profitability. But what if we don't have time for volunteer work? What if we're focused on billable hours and client deliverables? Then, you'll need to learn time management and prioritization. The new ownership isn't interested in employees who can only perform one dimension of their job. I could hear the frustration in Marcus's voice, and part of me felt sorry for him. But I remembered his words, dead weight, burden. You've never accomplished anything. and I stayed committed to the process. The fourth change was perhaps the most telling. Sarah announced that the company would be hosting a series of lunch and learn sessions where employees could share their backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives with their colleagues. Marcus signed up to present about strategic thinking in competitive markets. But Sarah had other plans. Actually, Marcus, we'd like you to present about your family background and how it shaped your values, she told him. The new ownership is particularly interested in understanding how employees' personal experiences influence their professional approaches. My family background. Marcus looked confused. I'm not sure how that's relevant to business strategy. Everything is relevant to business strategy. Your upbringing, your values, your assumptions about success and failure, all of that impacts how you interact with clients and colleagues. That weekend, Marcus called me with what he clearly thought was an opportunity to improve my image. Dad, I have to give a presentation at work about family background and values. I was thinking maybe this would be a good time for you to come to my office, meet some of my colleagues. You know, show them that even though you didn't achieve financial success, you're still a good person. The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. He wanted to parade me in front of his colleagues as an example of noble failure. The kind of working-class father who'd done his best but simply lacked the drive to achieve real success. That's an interesting idea, Marcus. You want me to talk about, well, you could share stories about hard work and perseverance. Maybe talk about the values you tried to instill in me, how you encouraged me to aim higher than you were able to. It could be inspiring, in a way, inspiring, yeah, you know. The classic American story of a son achieving more than his father, generational progress, that kind of thing. I was quiet for a moment, imagining Marcus's reaction when he discovered that his generational progress story was built on completely false assumptions. Marcus, what if I told you that your assumptions about my achievements might be wrong? What do you mean? What if I told you that success comes in many forms, and that judging someone's accomplishments by their lifestyle choices can be a dangerous mistake? Dad, are you feeling okay? You're talking like those self-help books Sarah reads. I'm feeling fine, son. Better than I have in years, actually. Look, I know you're probably proud of the life you've built, and you should be. You raised a successful son. You've been a decent person. You've contributed to your community in small ways. Those things matter, even if they're not exactly what most people would call impressive achievements. After I hung up, I realized that the time for subtle lessons was ending. Marcus needed to understand not just that he'd misjudged his father, but that his entire approach to measuring worth and success was fundamentally flawed. It was time to start preparing for the revelation that would change everything between us. The company-wide performance reviews came back exactly as I'd expected. Marcus's technical skills received high marks, but his scores for collaboration, mentorship, and peer relationships were devastating. Lisa Chen, his assigned mentee, had written a particularly damning evaluation. While Marcus clearly has strong analytical abilities, his communication style is condescending and discouraging. He seems to view mentorship as an opportunity to highlight my inexperience rather than help me develop professionally. I would not recommend him for leadership positions that involve managing people. Tom, the junior consultant Marcus had publicly criticized, was even more direct. Marcus treats colleagues he considers below his level with visible disdain. He interrupts presentations, dismisses ideas without consideration, and creates a hostile work environment for anyone he doesn't see as his equal. Even Janet, the administrative assistant, had provided feedback. Marcus speaks to support staff as if we're servants rather than colleagues. He's demanding, impatient, and never acknowledges the contributions we make to his success. Sarah Mitchell scheduled another meeting with Marcus to discuss his review results. "Marcus, I'll be direct," she said. "Your technical performance is excellent, but your interpersonal skills are creating serious problems." "Problems? I'm one of the highest performing consultants in the company." "You're high-performing in some areas, but you're failing in others that the new ownership considers equally important, such as leadership potential, team collaboration, mentorship effectiveness." "Marcus, multiple colleagues have described your management style as demeaning and counterproductive." I listened through the wall as my son struggled to process this feedback. "Look, maybe I come across as demanding sometimes, but that's because I have high standards. I'm trying to push people to excel. There's a difference between high standards and humiliation, Marcus. When you publicly criticize a colleague's ideas, you're not motivating them to improve. You're teaching them to avoid taking risks or sharing creative thoughts, but some ideas genuinely are bad ideas. Should I pretend otherwise? You should find ways to provide constructive feedback that preserve people's dignity and encourage continued engagement. This feels like we're prioritizing feelings over performance. We're prioritizing long-term team effectiveness over short-term individual achievement." "Marcus, can I ask you something? Do you respect your colleagues?" "Of course, I respect them." "Do you respect all of them, including the administrative staff, the junior consultants, the people who support your work?" There was a pause, and I knew Marcus was struggling with how to answer honestly without sounding terrible. "I respect their contributions," he said finally. "That's not the same thing. Marcus, do you believe that a person's worth is determined by their job title or salary level?" "No, but I do think some positions require more skill and contribute more value than others. And how do you treat people in those less valuable positions?" Another pause. I try to be professional. "Marcus, let me give you some specific examples. Last Tuesday, you snapped at Janet because she brought you coffee that wasn't hot enough. When Tom presented his market analysis, you interrupted him 3 times and then dismissed his conclusions without offering constructive alternatives. When Lisa suggested a new approach to client communication, you told her it was naive thinking in front of the entire team." I could hear the defensiveness in Marcus's voice when he replied. "Those were all legitimate business concerns. Were they, or were they, opportunities to demonstrate your superiority over people you consider beneath you?" "I don't consider anyone beneath me. Your behavior suggests otherwise." "Marcus, I'm going to be blunt with you. The new ownership is seriously reconsidering your future with this company." The silence that followed was deafening. "What does that mean?" "It means that unless you demonstrate significant improvement in how you treat your colleagues, your employment here may be terminated. But my client relationships are excellent. My revenue generation is above target. My analytical work is consistently rated highly. All of that is true. But the new ownership believes that employees who can't treat their colleagues with basic respect will eventually create problems with clients as well. That's ridiculous. I would never treat a client the way I treat. I mean, I'm always professional with clients. The way you treat what, Marcus? The way you treat people who can't impact your career advancement." That evening, Marcus called me in a panic. "Dad, something terrible is happening at work. The new ownership is questioning my future with the company." "What? Why would they do that?" "They're saying I have problems with interpersonal skills and team collaboration. They think I'm not leadership material because of my management style." "Did they say specifically?" They have all these examples of times when I was apparently too harsh with colleagues. But Dad, I was just trying to maintain professional standards. I was trying to push people to do better work. Marcus, can I ask you something? How do you think I would have handled those situations? What do you mean, if you saw a young employee making mistakes? Or if a colleague brought you coffee that wasn't quite right? How do you think I would have responded? Dad, no offense, but you never worked in a competitive professional environment. These situations require decisiveness and clear communication. Do they require humiliation? I never humiliated anyone. Marcus, think about how you felt when you were young and making mistakes. Think about the teachers or managers who helped you grow versus the ones who made you feel small. Which approach was more effective? This is different, Dad. This is business. Is it, or is it just people working together to accomplish goals? After I hung up, I realized that Marcus still didn't understand the fundamental lesson he needed to learn. He still thought that treating people poorly was acceptable as long as it was done in service of professional objectives. It was time to accelerate the timeline for his education. The next week, I made a decision that would push Marcus to his breaking point. Through Sarah Mitchell, I announced that Sterling and Associates would be implementing a new reverse mentorship program, where junior employees would be paired with senior consultants to provide feedback on leadership development. Lisa Chen was assigned as Marcus's reverse mentor. I watched their first session through the conference room camera, and it was one of the most uncomfortable things I'd ever witnessed. "So, Lisa," Marcus said, clearly struggling with the role reversal, "what kind of feedback do you have for me?" Lisa, to her credit, had prepared thoroughly for this conversation. She'd taken notes, gathered examples, and approached the task with the professionalism that Marcus had failed to show her. "Marcus, I want to start by saying that I recognize your technical expertise and your success with clients. But I think there are some areas where different approaches might yield better results, such as, well, for example, when I suggested the integrated social media strategy for the Morrison account, you dismissed it as naive thinking in front of the entire team. But when I researched it further, I found that 3 of our competitors have successfully implemented similar strategies for comparable clients." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I may have been ... direct in my response. It's not just about being direct. When you dismiss ideas publicly, it discourages other team members from sharing creative solutions. It makes people afraid to take intellectual risks. But some ideas genuinely aren't viable. Absolutely. But there are ways to redirect conversations that preserve people's dignity and encourage continued participation. For example, you could say, "That's an interesting approach. Let's talk about how we might adapt it to address the client's specific concerns." I watched Marcus's face as Lisa continued providing examples of more effective communication strategies. She was teaching him lessons that I'd tried to instill when he was young, lessons about treating people with respect and kindness regardless of their position in the hierarchy. "Lisa, can I ask you something?" Marcus said when she finished. "Do you think I'm a bad person?" The question surprised her, and it surprised me. For the first time in weeks, Marcus sounded vulnerable rather than defensive. "No, Marcus, I don't think you're a bad person at all. I think you're someone who's been very successful very quickly. And maybe you haven't had time to develop some of the interpersonal skills that are crucial for long-term leadership." "What do you mean?" "I mean that technical competence and people skills are both important, but they develop differently. You can learn analytical frameworks in business school, but learning how to motivate and inspire people takes practice and self-reflection. Do you think I can learn those skills?" I think anyone can learn them if they're genuinely committed to treating other people as valuable contributors rather than obstacles to their own success. After the session ended, I found myself feeling proud of Lisa Chen and heartbroken for my son. She'd shown him more grace and wisdom than he'd shown anyone in months. And for a moment, I'd seen a glimpse of the boy I'd raised. But the real test came 2 days later. Marcus was presenting to a major client, and Tom, the junior consultant he'd previously criticized, was scheduled to provide supporting data analysis. I watched the presentation through the client's conference room camera, a perk of owning the building. Midway through Marcus's presentation, the client asked a complex question about market penetration that required Tom's specific research. Marcus could have simply asked Tom to respond, acknowledging his expertise and giving him credit for his work. Instead, Marcus answered the question himself, paraphrasing Tom's research without attribution and subtly suggesting that the insights were his own. I watched Tom's face fall as he realized what had happened. He'd done the work, developed the analysis, and prepared to support the presentation. But Marcus had claimed credit for his contributions. After the client meeting, I observed the team debriefing in the conference room. "Great presentation, Marcus," said Patricia, the account manager. "That market penetration analysis was particularly insightful." "Thank you," Marcus replied. "I spent a lot of time researching those trends." Tom sat quietly, saying nothing, but I could see the hurt and anger in his expression. That afternoon, Tom submitted his resignation letter. When Sarah called me to report the development, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness that threatened to overwhelm me. "Marcus just cost us a talented employee," she said. Tom's resignation letter specifically cites Marcus's behavior as a factor in his decision to leave. What did Marcus do? He took credit for Tom's work in front of a client, then accepted praise for analysis he didn't conduct. Tom felt that his contributions weren't valued and that working under Marcus would limit his professional development. What was Marcus's response when you told him? He said that Tom was probably just looking for an excuse to leave anyway, and that maybe we're better off without employees who can't handle a collaborative work environment. He called it collaborative. Marcus genuinely seems to believe that taking credit for other people's work is normal business practice. That evening, Marcus called me to complain about Tom's resignation. "Dad, the most ridiculous thing happened today. Tom quit, and he's blaming me for creating a hostile work environment. Can you believe that?" "What happened, Marcus?" "Nothing. We had a client presentation. I answered some questions, and apparently Tom felt like I didn't give him enough credit for some background research he'd done. It's absurd." "Did you do the research yourself?" "Well, no, but I coordinated the project and integrated his findings into the overall presentation strategy. That's what senior consultants do. We synthesize information from multiple sources." "Did you tell the client that Tom had conducted the analysis?" "I didn't think it was necessary to get into the weeds about who did what. The client wanted answers, not a breakdown of our internal process." "Marcus, when someone does good work that contributes to your success, don't you think they deserve recognition?" "Dad, this isn't elementary school where everyone gets a participation trophy. This is business. Results matter more than feelings." After I hung up, I realized that my son had become someone I might not even like if I met him as a stranger. The boy who used to share his Halloween candy with kids who didn't have costumes had turned into a man who would steal credit from colleagues without a second thought. It was time to end this charade and show Marcus exactly who his dead weight father really was. I spent the weekend preparing for what would be the most important conversation of my life. On Monday morning, I would reveal myself as the owner of Sterling and Associates, and Marcus would have to confront everything he thought he knew about success, ambition, and his own father. But first, I wanted to give him one last chance to show that he was capable of learning and growth. On Sunday evening, I called him. "Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about Tom leaving your company. Dad, I really don't want to rehash that whole situation. Just hear me out, son. I want to tell you a story about something that happened when you were young. Dad, I'm really not in the mood for, please, Marcus, just give me 5 minutes." He sighed. "Fine, 5 minutes. Do you remember when you were 12 and you were working on that science fair project about solar energy? Vaguely were struggling with the technical aspects, and your friend Kevin came over to help. Kevin was always good with electronics, and he spent an entire weekend helping you build the demonstration model. Okay, what's your point? Do you remember what happened when you won 3rd place in the science fair? I guess I won 3rd place. So what, Marcus? When they announced your name and you went up to accept the ribbon, what did you say?" There was a long pause. "I don't remember." "You said, 'I want to thank my friend Kevin, because I couldn't have done this without his help.' You made sure everyone knew that your success was a team effort." "Dad, what does this have to do with what happened to that boy, Marcus? What happened to the kid who understood that sharing credit made everyone stronger? I grew up, Dad. I learned how the real world works. Did you? Or did you just convince yourself that being selfish was the same thing as being successful? Look, Dad, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you don't understand the competitive nature of consulting. If you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will. There's a difference between advocating for yourself and taking credit for other people's work. I never took credit for Marcus. Stop. I know what happened in that client meeting. I know that Tom did the research, Tom developed the analysis, and you presented it as your own work. How could you possibly know that?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd planned to reveal the truth. But Marcus had pushed me to this point. "I know because I've been watching, son. I've been watching everything that happens at your company." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your deadweight father owns Sterling and Associates. I'm talking about the fact that I'm the mysterious investor who bought your company 6 weeks ago." The silence on the other end of the phone was complete. "Marcus, are you there? That's impossible. Is it? Why is it impossible? Because you work at a hardware store. Because you drive a 15-year-old Honda. Because you live in a tiny apartment and shop at thrift stores. And what does any of that have to do with how much money I have? Dad, are you having some kind of breakdown? Are you confused about something?" "I'm not confused, Marcus. I'm the owner of Sterling and Associates. I'm the person who's been implementing all the policy changes you've been complaining about. I'm the reason Sarah Mitchell has been evaluating your performance and questioning your leadership potential. This is insane. You're talking like you're some kind of secret millionaire. I'm not a secret millionaire, son. I'm a very public millionaire who chooses to live modestly. That's impossible. Marcus, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I want you to come to conference room A at your office. Sarah Mitchell will be there, along with Jonathan Pierce, my financial advisor, and the legal team that handled the acquisition. They'll provide you with all the documentation you need to understand exactly who your father is and what he's accomplished. Dad, this is crazy. Even if you had money, why would you buy my company? Why would you spy on me? I didn't spy on you, Marcus. I observed you, and what I observed was a man who had forgotten every value I tried to teach him. A man who thought success gave him the right to treat other people poorly. A man who was so ashamed of his father that he couldn't see what his father had actually accomplished. If this is true, if you really own my company, what does that mean for my job? That depends entirely on you, son. It depends on whether you're capable of learning the lessons you apparently need to learn. What lessons? That success without character is worthless. That treating people with respect isn't a weakness, it's a strength. That judging someone by their external circumstances is a mistake that can cost you everything. After I hung up, I sat in my modest living room, surrounded by the simple furniture that had embarrassed my son so much, and I wondered if I'd just destroyed my relationship with him forever. But I also knew that if Marcus was ever going to become the kind of man I could be proud of, he needed to understand that his deadweight father had spent 40 years building something much more valuable than his BMW or his fancy house. Tomorrow morning, everything would change between us. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining Marcus's reaction when he walked into that conference room and realized that his deadweight father was actually the owner of his prestigious company. Would he be angry? Embarrassed? Would he finally understand the lesson I was trying to teach him? At 8:30 a.m., I was already sitting in conference room A when Sarah Mitchell arrived with Jonathan Pierce and the legal team. I'd put on my best suit, not the cheap one I wore to church, but the Italian wool one I'd bought for important business meetings that Marcus never knew I attended. "You look different today, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "Today I stopped pretending to be less than I am," I replied. At exactly 9 a.m., Marcus walked through the door. He looked tired, anxious, like he'd spent the night wrestling with the impossible conversation we'd had. When he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table, dressed professionally and surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors, his face went completely white. "Dad," his voice was barely a whisper. "Good morning, Marcus. Please, sit down." He moved to the chair across from me like he was walking through a dream, his eyes darting between me and the official-looking documents spread across the table. "Marcus," I said once he'd sat down, "I'd like you to meet Jonathan Pierce, my financial advisor for the past 20 years. Jonathan has been helping me manage my investments and business acquisitions." Jonathan reached across the table to shake Marcus's hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Marcus. Your father speaks about you all the time." "I don't understand what's happening here," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "You're about to understand everything, son," I replied. "Jonathan, would you mind showing Marcus the documentation?" For the next 30 minutes, Jonathan walked Marcus through the acquisition papers, bank statements, investment portfolios, and business records that told the real story of Robert Sterling's financial life. I watched my son's face as the numbers sank in the rental properties, the stock holdings, the business investments, the carefully managed wealth that had grown over 4 decades. "This says you have over $4 million in investment accounts," Marcus said, staring at one of the statements. "That's just the liquid assets, Marcus. There are also the properties, the business holdings, and other investments." "But how... when did you... I don't understand how this is possible." "It's possible because, while you were assuming that my modest lifestyle meant I was a failure, I was actually building something substantial. It's possible because I learned that real wealth isn't about impressing people. It's about having the freedom to live according to your values. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think that you were struggling?" "Because I wanted you to develop your own character, your own work ethic, your own sense of what success really means. I didn't want you to become someone who only respected people based on their bank account." Marcus was quiet for a long time, his hands trembling as he looked through the documents. "Is this why you bought my company? To humiliate me? I bought your company because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one important was watching. I wanted to understand how my son had become the kind of person who would call his father dead weight in front of his own family. Dad, let me finish, Marcus. Over the past 6 weeks, I've watched you treat your colleagues with contempt. I've seen you humiliate talented people like Lisa Chen, take credit for Tom's work, and speak to support staff like they're beneath you. I've watched you become someone I don't recognize." Sarah Mitchell opened her folder. "Marcus, would you like me to review the specific incidents we've documented?" Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, I remember. Do you?" I asked. "Do you remember telling Lisa her ideas were naive, thinking in front of the entire office? Do you remember taking credit for Tom's research in that client presentation? Do you remember snapping at Janet because your coffee wasn't hot enough? I was just trying to maintain professional standards." "No, son, you were being a bully. You were using your position to make yourself feel superior by making other people feel small." Marcus put his head in his hands. "I never meant I didn't realize ... That's the problem, Marcus. You didn't realize because you'd convinced yourself that success gave you the right to treat people poorly. You'd convinced yourself that being demanding and condescending was the same thing as being a leader. So what happens now? Are you going to fire me? Are you going to destroy my career?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved despite his flaws, and I realized that this moment would define our relationship for the rest of our lives. "No, Marcus, I'm going to give you a choice. And that choice will determine whether you keep your job and whether we can rebuild our relationship." "What kind of choice?" "You can continue working here under a performance improvement plan that focuses on leadership development and interpersonal skills. You'll work with an executive coach, participate in mentorship programs, and demonstrate that you can treat all your colleagues with respect. And if I don't want to do that, then you can resign with a generous severance package and find another job where you can continue being the kind of person who thinks success justifies cruelty." "But Dad, if I stay and do this performance improvement plan, everyone will know that I'm only here because you own the company." "Actually, Marcus, that's not true. Sarah, would you like to explain the arrangement we've discussed?" Sarah nodded. "Marcus, your father has agreed to place his ownership of Sterling and Associates into a blind trust managed by an independent board. He'll have no direct control over personnel decisions, including decisions about your employment." "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that your future at this company will depend entirely on your performance, not on your relationship to me. If you can learn to be a leader who inspires people instead of intimidating them, you'll advance based on merit. If you can't, you'll be terminated regardless of who your father is." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I said at dinner, and I'm sorry for how I've been treating people at work. I don't know when I became someone who thinks money and position make me better than other people." "I know you're sorry, son, but sorry isn't enough. The question is whether you're willing to do the hard work of becoming the kind of person you should have been all along. What if I can't change? What if this is just who I am now? Marcus, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you found that wallet in the grocery store parking lot? Vaguely, it had $40 in it, which seemed like a fortune to you at the time. Do you remember what you did?" "I turned it in to customer service." "That's right. You turned it in because you said it wasn't yours, and the person who lost it probably needed it more than we did. That's the boy I raised, Marcus. That's who you really are, underneath all the arrogance and materialism. But what if I've lost that person? What if I've become someone who only cares about success and status? Then this is your chance to find him again. This is your chance to remember that character matters more than accomplishment, and that treating people with kindness is more important than impressing them with your achievements. Marcus looked around the conference room, at the evidence of his father's secret success, then back at me. If I do this, if I try to change, will you forgive me for what I said? Will you forgive me for being ashamed of you? Son, I forgave you the moment you said those words. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. You'll have to earn that back through your actions, not your promises. I want to try, Dad. I want to do the performance improvement plan. I want to learn how to be better. As I looked at my son across that conference table, I realized that this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Marcus had a long way to go before he became the kind of man I could be proud of. But, for the first time in years, I believed he was capable of making that journey. The next 3 months were the most challenging period of both our lives. Marcus threw himself into the performance improvement plan with the same intensity he'd previously applied to climbing the corporate ladder. But changing ingrained behaviors and attitudes is much harder than mastering analytical skills. I watched from a distance, literally and figuratively, as my son struggled to become a better person. The blind trust arrangement meant I couldn't interfere with his progress. But I could observe through the security feeds and Sarah's regular reports. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. During his first week under the new arrangement, I watched Marcus catch himself mid-sentence as he was about to interrupt a colleague during a team meeting. He visibly struggled to listen to Lisa Chen's presentation without dismissing her ideas. When Janet brought him coffee that wasn't quite right, I saw him take a deep breath and simply say thank you instead of complaining. But there were setbacks too. 2 weeks into the program, Marcus reverted to his old behaviors during a high-client crisis. When a junior consultant made an error in a financial model, Marcus publicly criticized him with the same condescending tone he'd used before. Sarah called him into her office immediately. "Marcus, what just happened in there was exactly the kind of behavior that put your job at risk," she told him during their meeting. I know, it's just, when there's a lot of pressure and money on the line, I fall back into old habits. That's exactly when leadership matters most. Anyone can be kind when things are going well. Real leaders show their character during crises. How do I break habits I've had for years? The same way you developed them, through consistent practice. Every interaction is a choice. Marcus, you can choose to respond with patience and respect, or you can choose to respond with arrogance and criticism. The real breakthrough came in month 2. During an incident I witnessed through the conference room cameras, Lisa Chen was presenting a new marketing strategy to a major client, and she made a factual error about their competitor's market share. I watched Marcus's face as he realized the mistake, saw him start to lean forward to interrupt and correct her, then stop himself. Instead, he waited until she finished her section, then smoothly stepped in with additional context that corrected the error without embarrassing Lisa or undermining her credibility with the client. "Lisa's analysis of the overall market trends is excellent," he said. "I'd like to add some recent data that builds on her insights." After the meeting, I watched Marcus approach Lisa privately. "Hey, just a heads up, the market share numbers for Peterson Industries are actually higher than what you mentioned. I covered it in the meeting, but you might want to update your notes for next time." "Thank you," Lisa replied, looking genuinely grateful. "I appreciate you handling that so smoothly. "We're a team," Marcus said, and for the first time in months, I heard echoes of the boy I'd raised. The most significant test came in month 3, when Marcus was assigned to lead a project team that included several junior consultants and support staff. I watched him run his first team meeting with a completely different approach than he'd used before. "Okay, everyone, let's start by hearing from each team member about their ideas for this project," he began. "I want to make sure we're incorporating everyone's perspectives before we develop our strategy." He listened to each person's input without interrupting, asked clarifying questions that showed genuine interest, and built on people's ideas rather than dismissing them. When Janet, the administrative assistant, suggested a client communication approach that Marcus might have previously mocked, he responded thoughtfully. "That's an interesting idea, Janet. Can you walk us through how you think that would work in practice?" Janet's face lit up as she explained her thinking, and Marcus incorporated elements of her suggestion into the final project plan. But the moment that truly convinced me Marcus was changing came during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Marcus was having lunch with Tom, the junior consultant who had resigned because of Marcus's previous behavior. Tom had returned to the company after hearing about the culture changes, and Marcus had requested a private meeting with him. "Tom, I owe you an apology," Marcus said. "What I did in that client meeting, taking credit for your work, was wrong. It was unprofessional, and it was unfair to you. I appreciate that, Marcus. More than that, I want you to know that your research was excellent, and the client signed with us largely because of the insights you provided. You deserved credit for that work, and I'm sorry I didn't give it to you. Thank you. That means a lot. Tom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Do you think I can change? Do you think I can become the kind of leader people actually want to work with?" Tom considered the question carefully. "Marcus, 3 months ago, I would have said no. But watching how you've been handling the team meetings, how you've been treating people, yeah, I think you can change. The question is whether you want to badly enough." "I do want to, not just because my job depends on it, but because I don't like who I became. I don't want to be the kind of person who makes other people feel small to make myself feel big." That evening, Marcus called me for the first time since the conference room revelation. "Dad, can we talk?" "Of course, son. I wanted to tell you that I'm starting to understand what you were trying to teach me, about how success without character is meaningless, about how treating people with respect isn't weakness." "I'm glad to hear that, Marcus." "Dad, I also wanted to ask you something. Why did you live so modestly all these years? Why didn't you buy the nice house and the expensive car? Why didn't you show off your success?" I thought about his question carefully. "Because I learned early in life that the things you own end up owning you. Because I wanted to be valued for who I was, not what I had. Because true security comes from knowing you can be happy with enough, not from constantly needing more." "But weren't you ever tempted? Didn't you ever want people to know how successful you were?" "Sometimes, but then I would think about the people I'd met who had money but no friends, who had possessions but no peace, who had achieved everything they thought they wanted but still felt empty inside." "Is that what you thought was happening to me?" "Yes, son. I thought you were becoming someone who measured worth by wealth, who confused having things with being somebody." You were right. I did become that person. But Dad, I want you to know that I'm trying to find my way back to the values you taught me. I know you are, Marcus, and I'm proud of you for trying. As I hung up the phone that night, I realized that the most expensive lesson I'd ever given my son wasn't the money I'd spent buying his company. It was the risk I'd taken in showing him who I really was and demanding that he become who he was supposed to be. 6 months after the conference room revelation, Sterling and Associates was a different company. The culture changes I'd implemented through Sarah Mitchell had transformed not just Marcus, but the entire organization. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements. Client retention was up, and several talented people who had left under the old management had returned. But the most significant change was in my relationship with Marcus. He'd not only completed his performance improvement plan successfully, but had emerged as one of the company's most effective team leaders. The junior consultants specifically requested to work on his projects, and client feedback consistently praised his collaborative approach and genuine concern for their long-term success. More importantly, Marcus had begun to understand the difference between achieving success and earning respect. I was having my monthly dinner with him, a tradition we'd started after our relationship began to heal, when he told me something that made my heart swell with pride. "Dad, something happened at work yesterday that I wanted to share with you." "What's that?" Lisa Chen came to me with an idea for a new client service offering. 6 months ago, I would have either dismissed it or taken credit for it if it was good. Instead, I helped her develop a business case and presented it to the partners with her as the lead. How did that go? They approved it. Lisa's getting promoted to senior consultant, and she'll be heading up the new service line. That's wonderful, son. How do you feel about it? Proud? Really proud. Not of myself, but of her. And Dad, I realized something. Helping someone else succeed feels better than achieving success at their expense. That's one of the most important lessons anyone can learn. I know, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand it. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Marcus spoke again. "Dad, can I ask you about the trust arrangement? About you giving up control of the company? What about it? Was that real? Or was it just a way to make me feel like I was earning my success?" "It was completely real, Marcus. I transferred ownership to an independent board because I meant what I said about your future depending on your performance, not our relationship, but that means you gave up millions of dollars just to teach me a lesson." "No, son. I invested millions of dollars in my relationship with you, and it was the best investment I've ever made." Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing this information. "Dad, I need to tell you something else. Something I've been thinking about since that dinner 6 months ago." "What's that?" "I've been volunteering at the community center downtown, working with kids who are aging out of the foster care system, helping them with job interviews, resume writing, basic life skills." "That's wonderful, Marcus. What made you decide to do that?" "I kept thinking about what you said, about how success without character is meaningless. I realized I'd spent years focusing only on my own advancement, never thinking about how I could use my advantages to help other people." "And how has that experience been?" "Eye-opening. These kids face challenges I never had to think about. They're working twice as hard as I ever did just to get basic opportunities. It's made me realize how much of my success was due to circumstances I took for granted." "Like what?" "Like having a father who worked multiple jobs to pay for my education, like growing up in a stable home where I never had to worry about basic needs, like having someone who believed in me even when I didn't deserve it." I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes. "Marcus, that's exactly the kind of understanding I hoped you'd develop." "Dad, I want to do more. I want to set up a scholarship fund for kids aging out of foster care. I want to use my position at the company to create internship opportunities. I want to find ways to give back that are more meaningful than just writing checks." "What about your lifestyle? Your BMW, your expensive house, All the things that used to be so important to you. I'm selling the house and moving into something smaller. I'm trading in the BMW for a reliable used car. I realized I was spending money to impress people I didn't even like, while ignoring opportunities to make a real difference in the world. Are you sure about this? That's a significant change. Dad, 6 months ago, the most important thing in my life was making sure people knew I was successful. Now, the most important thing is making sure I'm actually worthy of the success I've achieved. I'm proud of you, son. Prouder than I've ever been. Thank you. But Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, of course. Do you think you can forgive me? Really, forgive me? For the things I said that night, for the way I treated you, for becoming someone who was ashamed of his own father. I reached across the table and took my son's hand. Marcus, I forgave you months ago, but more than that, I'm grateful. Grateful for what? For giving me the opportunity to show you who I really am. For forcing me to stop hiding my success and start using it to teach important lessons. For helping me understand that being a good father sometimes means being willing to make your children uncomfortable. Dad, can I tell you something else? Anything. I'm grateful too, not for the way I treated you, but for how you responded. A lot of fathers would have just written off a son who called them dead weight. You could have used your money to punish me instead of educate me. Marcus, you're my son. My job isn't to punish you for making mistakes, it's to help you learn from them. As we finished dinner that night, I realized that the story I'd been telling myself for months was wrong. I'd thought this was about teaching Marcus that his assumptions about his father were incorrect, but the real lesson was deeper than that. This was about teaching both of us that love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst instincts, and that real success is measured not by what you accomplish for yourself, but by how you use your accomplishments to lift up other people. Marcus was finally becoming the man I'd always known he could be. And I was finally becoming the father I'd always wanted to be, not just someone who provided for his child, but someone who helped shape his character. 1 year after that devastating dinner where Marcus called me dead weight, we found ourselves back at his house for Tommy's birthday celebration. But everything was different now. Marcus had sold his expensive house and moved into a modest but comfortable home in a more diverse neighborhood. Instead of the BMW, he drove a 3-year-old Honda Civic, not because he couldn't afford better, but because he'd learned the difference between what you need and what you want. Most importantly, the arrogant, condescending man who had humiliated his father in front of the family had been replaced by someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Grandpa Bob, Tommy called out as I arrived, running to give me a hug. At 23, he was now working as a social worker, inspired by the volunteer work Marcus had been doing at the community center. Hey there, Tommy, happy birthday. I can't wait to tell you about the program I'm developing at work. It's based on some of the mentorship ideas Uncle Marcus shared with me. Uncle Marcus, it still made me smile to hear Tommy refer to his father that way. The relationship between Marcus and his family had improved dramatically, as Marcus learned to show genuine interest in other people's lives and accomplishments. During dinner, the conversation was completely different from the one we'd had a year earlier. Instead of Marcus dominating the discussion with stories about his professional achievements, he spent most of the time asking Tommy about his work, Sarah about her recent promotion, and even asking me about the volunteer tutoring I'd started doing at the local literacy center. Dad, tell us about the scholarship program, Sarah said. Marcus mentioned you've been working on something special. I smiled, pleased that Marcus had been sharing information about my activities rather than hiding or downplaying them. Well, I've established a fund to provide college scholarships for kids aging out of foster care. But it's not just about money. We're also providing mentorship, internship opportunities, and ongoing support throughout their college years. That's amazing, Tommy said. How many students are you supporting? We're starting with 12 students this year, but we hope to expand significantly as the program grows. Dad, Marcus said, I hope you don't mind, but I've been talking to some of my colleagues about contributing to the fund. A lot of them are interested in both financial support and volunteering as mentors. That's wonderful, son. The more people we can involve, the greater impact we can have. As the evening continued, I marveled at how much our family dynamic had changed. Marcus asked thoughtful questions, listened to other people's responses, and shared his own experiences with humility, rather than arrogance. But the moment that truly showed me how much he'd changed came when Tommy asked about his work. Uncle Marcus, how are things going at the consulting firm? Really well, actually. We just completed a project that I'm particularly proud of. What made it special? We helped a small non-profit organization develop a sustainable funding strategy. They provide job training for homeless veterans. And our work is going to help them expand their services to reach twice as many people. That sounds like meaningful work. It is. You know, Tommy, for years I thought success meant landing the biggest clients and generating the most revenue. But I've learned that real success means using your skills to make a positive impact on the world. Sarah looked at Marcus with genuine admiration. I'm proud of the man you've become, Marcus. The changes you've made haven't been easy, but they've been inspiring to watch. Thank you, Sarah. But I have to give credit where it's due. Dad showed me what real character looks like, even when I was too arrogant to see it. After dinner, Marcus and I found ourselves alone on his back patio, looking up at the stars. Dad, can I ask you something I've been wondering about? Of course. A year ago, when you bought the company and put me through all those changes, were you ever worried that it would backfire? That I might just quit, or that our relationship would be permanently damaged? I considered his question carefully. Yes, I was worried about that. But Marcus, I was even more worried about what would happen if I didn't take action. I was worried about watching you become someone I couldn't respect. Someone who used success as an excuse to treat people poorly. Do you think I would have eventually figured it out on my own? Maybe, but maybe not. Sometimes we get so caught up in the rewards of bad behavior that we can't see how destructive it is. You were successful at work, despite treating people poorly, so you had no incentive to change. Dad, I need to tell you something I've never said before. What's that? Thank you. Thank you for caring enough about me to risk our relationship in order to teach me important lessons. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was acting like someone you couldn't possibly be proud of. Marcus, you're my son. I never could have given up on you. But you could have made different choices. You could have used your money to punish me instead of educate me. You could have publicly humiliated me instead of giving me a chance to learn and grow. That wouldn't have helped anyone, son. Maybe not, but it would have been understandable. I said terrible things to you. I called you dead weight. I told you that you'd never accomplished anything meaningful. You said those things because you didn't understand what accomplishment really means. You thought it was about external validation and material possessions. Now you know it's about character and contribution. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us reflecting on the journey we'd taken together. Dad, there's something else I want to tell you. I'm listening. I'm thinking about leaving the consulting firm and starting my own non-profit organization. I want to create a program that provides business mentorship and life skills training for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Marcus. What would you focus on? Teaching them the things I wish I'd learned earlier, that success without character is meaningless. That treating people with respect is more important than impressing them with your achievements, that real leadership means lifting other people up rather than putting them down. Those are valuable lessons. They're lessons I learned from you, Dad, even when I wasn't smart enough to appreciate them at the time. As we said goodbye that evening, Marcus hugged me tighter and longer than he had in years. I love you, Dad, and I'm grateful every day that I have a father who cared enough about my character to risk everything to help me become a better person. I love you too, son, and I'm proud of the man you've become. As I drove home that night in my 15-year-old Honda Civic, the same car Marcus had once been ashamed of, I realized that the greatest wealth I'd ever accumulated wasn't in my investment accounts or real estate holdings. It was in the relationship I'd rebuilt with my son, and in the knowledge that he was finally becoming the kind of person I'd always known he could be. 2 years after that devastating dinner where Marcus called me dead weight, I found myself standing in the conference room of Sterling and Associates, but this time for a very different kind of meeting. Marcus had called together the entire company to make an announcement that would surprise everyone, including me. "Thank you all for gathering today," Marcus began, addressing the room full of colleagues who had watched his transformation over the past 2 years. "I have some important news to share about my future with the company, and I wanted my father to be here for this announcement." I sat in the back of the room, still amazed by how much my son had changed. The arrogant, condescending man who had once humiliated junior colleagues had become someone people genuinely respected and wanted to work with. His performance reviews were stellar, not just for his technical skills, but for his leadership and mentorship abilities. "As of next month, I'll be leaving Sterling and Associates to start my own organization," Marcus continued. "I'm founding a non-profit called Second Chances, which will provide business mentorship and life skills training for young people aging out of foster care." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several colleagues immediately stood up to congratulate him, and I could see genuine sadness on people's faces at the news of his departure. Lisa Chen, who had become one of Marcus's closest collaborators, raised her hand. "Marcus, this sounds amazing, but can I ask what inspired this decision?" Marcus smiled and looked directly at me. 2 years ago, my father taught me the most important lesson of my life. He showed me that success without character is meaningless, and that real accomplishment comes from lifting other people up, not putting them down. "But you've been so successful here," said Tom, the junior consultant who had returned to the company after Marcus's transformation. "Why leave now when things are going so well?" "Because I've learned that personal success feels hollow when it's not connected to a larger purpose. I want to use the skills I've developed here to help young people who are facing the same kinds of challenges I once created for others, the challenge of being judged by their circumstances rather than their potential." After the meeting ended, Marcus and I walked to a nearby coffee shop to talk privately. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, son. Are you disappointed that I'm leaving the consulting world? After everything you did to save my career there, does it feel like I'm throwing it all away?" I looked at my son, this man who had grown from someone I was ashamed of into someone I was genuinely proud of, and I felt nothing but admiration for his choice. "Marcus, I'm not disappointed at all. I'm incredibly proud of you, really, really. 2 years ago, you were focused entirely on your own advancement, your own recognition, your own success. Now you're choosing to use your talents to help people who have no way to repay you. That's not throwing away your career, that's fulfilling it. But Dad, I'm giving up a 6-figure salary to start a non-profit. I'm trading financial security for the uncertainty of grant funding and donations. Are you worried about money? Honestly, a little. I've gotten used to a certain lifestyle, and starting over financially at 37 feels scary. Marcus, can I tell you something about money that I've learned over the years? Please. Having enough money to feel secure is important. But having more money than you need doesn't make you more secure, it just makes you more afraid of losing what you have. What do you mean? I mean that for 40 years I've had more money than I needed. But I was happiest when I was living simply and focusing on relationships and meaningful work. The money gave me freedom, but it was the freedom to choose purpose over profit that brought real satisfaction. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this insight. Dad, can I ask you for some advice about the non-profit? Of course. I want to do this right. I want to make sure I'm helping these young people effectively, not just making myself feel good about being charitable. How do I avoid the mistakes I made in the corporate world? What kind of mistakes are you worried about? I'm worried about becoming paternalistic, about thinking I know what's best for people without listening to what they actually need. I'm worried about creating programs that serve my ego instead of serving them. I smiled, realizing that Marcus had learned one of the most important lessons about helping others. That good intentions aren't enough if they're not combined with humility and genuine respect for the people you're trying to serve. Those are exactly the right concerns to have, son. The fact that you're asking those questions tells me you're going to approach this work with the right attitude. What would you do in my position? I would start by spending time with the young people you want to help, not as a program director or a mentor, but as someone who wants to understand their experiences and perspectives. Let them teach you what they need before you try to teach them what you think they should know. That makes sense. Dad, there's something else I want to tell you. What's that? I've been thinking about the foundation I want to create, and I want to ask if you'd consider being a founding board member. Marcus, I'm honored that you'd ask. But don't you think the organization would be stronger if it wasn't seen as a family enterprise? Normally, I'd agree with you, but this is different. Dad, you've spent the past 2 years teaching me about character and leadership through your actions, not just your words. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have helping me guide an organization that's supposed to help young people develop those same qualities. What would my role be? Mostly advisory, helping me think through difficult decisions, reviewing our programs to make sure we're staying true to our mission, and occasionally sharing your story with the young people we're serving. My story, the story of how you built real wealth while living modestly, how you used your success to teach important lessons rather than just accumulate more success. How you chose education over punishment when someone you loved disappointed you. As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. Dad, there's one more thing. I wrote you a letter, and I want you to read it when you get home. What kind of letter? The kind I should have written 2 years ago, if I'd been the kind of person then that I'm trying to be now. That evening, I sat in my modest living room and opened Marcus's letter. As I read it, I felt emotions I'd been holding back for 2 years finally surface. Dear Dad, it began. 2 years ago, I said things to you that I can never take back. I called you dead weight and told you that you'd never accomplished anything meaningful. I was wrong about the facts. You'd accomplished more than I could have imagined, but more importantly, I was wrong about what accomplishment means. You taught me that real success isn't about impressing people with what you have, but about inspiring them with who you are. You showed me that leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room, but about helping everyone in the room become smarter. You demonstrated that wealth is a tool for building character, not a substitute for it. I know I can never fully repay you for the patience and love you showed me when I didn't deserve either, but I hope I can honor what you've taught me by using the rest of my life to help other people learn the lessons you tried so hard to teach me. Thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself. Thank you for seeing who I could become even when I couldn't see it. And thank you for showing me that the greatest inheritance a father can leave his son isn't money, it's values. Love you, and I'm finally proud to be your son. Marcus. As I finished reading the letter, I realized that my plan to teach Marcus a lesson about respect and humility had accomplished something much more important. It had helped both of us understand that love isn't about accepting unacceptable behavior. It's about caring enough to demand better. Marcus was going to leave his lucrative career to help young people who reminded me of the boy he used to be: generous, idealistic, committed to fairness and kindness, and I was going to support him in that journey. Not as the wealthy father who could solve his problems with money, but as someone who believed in his capacity to make a real difference in the world. 3 months later, at the grand opening of Second Chances, I watched my son address a room full of 18 and 19-year-olds who had aged out of foster care. He spoke to them with the same respect and genuine interest he'd learned to show his colleagues, and I could see in their faces that they recognized his sincerity. I want all of you to know, Marcus told them, that your circumstances don't define your potential. I want you to know that success isn't about proving you're better than other people, it's about becoming better than you used to be. And I want you to know that someone believing in you can change your life, if you're willing to believe in yourself. As I listened to my son share the wisdom he'd gained through his own transformation, I realized that the greatest surprise of this entire journey wasn't that Marcus had underestimated his father's accomplishments. The greatest surprise was that, in teaching him about character and respect, I'd rediscovered the joy of being genuinely proud of the man my son had become.